Hey there. Tonight we're heading somewhere dry. Not desert dry, not your lips crack when you smile dry. I mean march 20 miles in chainmail under the Mediterranean sun dry. The kind of dry where even your thoughts are sweating. Where the only shade is an illusion, and the only reward for surviving the day is surviving another one. But don't worry, you won't have to fight. You just have to lie back, close your eyes, and imagine a world where your morning starts with a trumpet, not coffee. We're not talking about emperors tonight. Not Caesar, not Cicero, not the people who made the speeches. We're talking about the ones who marched for them. The ones who bled into the dust, dug ditches before dinner, and prayed the cook wasn't out of barley again. Before we begin, if this is your kind of bedtime story, feel free to tap like or subscribe. Or don't, no pressure. This isn't a recruitment video. Rome already has enough legions. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. I always enjoy seeing where this sleepy little cohort wanders every night. Now, dim the lights. Let the fan hum like a distant wind across the Alps. And let's go, not to glory, but to gravel. How you've just tucked yourself in. The sheets are soft, the pillow's cool, the day is behind you. But just for a moment, picture this. Instead of lying in bed, you're curled up on a rough wool blanket, stretched across uneven earth. Your back aches, your feet are blistered. You're not in your room anymore. You're in a Roman military camp. Somewhere out near the frontier. Somewhere cold, somewhere loud. Your tent smells like leather, smoke, and men who haven't seen a bathhouse in 3 campaigns. Outside, a trumpet blares. Not sweet, not noble, sharp, shrill. Like someone punishing a brass horn for desertion. You roll over. Your shoulder cracks. Your mouth tastes like iron. The dirt beneath you holds the shape of your spine, but offers no comfort. A fellow soldier snores beside you. Another mutters in his sleep, in Latin or maybe just pain. Somewhere near the edge of camp, a donkey brays in protest. Or maybe agreement. You don't know anymore. Tomorrow's schedule is simple. Wake up, march, dig, fight maybe, bleed probably, sleep on it, repeat. So before we begin, do you think you could have handled it? Could you march 30 kilometers in armor, dig a trench before dusk, and then take the midnight watch without collapsing into it? Let's find out. Not by sword, not by sweat, but by story. Welcome to the Roman Legion. And that's how you ended up here, in a Roman military camp smelling faintly of onions, metal, and other people's ambition. But let's rewind, just a little. You were 17, still lived with your mother, still believed soup should come with bread, and that back pain was for old men. You spent your mornings shaping wood, chair legs mostly, occasionally a stool if the gods were generous and the orders came in. You were halfway through sanding a table leg when it happened. A horn, then a drum beat, then the sound of someone mispronouncing your name, loud enough to startle the chickens. You froze. The wood slipped from your hands. Your mother didn't speak. She didn't have to. She just handed you your belt, the good one, and patted your shoulder like it might fall off without supervision. No ceremony, no speech from the village elder, no teary farewell or inspiring anthem. Just a list of names, a line in the dust, and an old man waving a sandal like it was an official document. Report to the levee grounds, they said. Bring water, don't bring questions. You walked, not marched, walked. Like someone heading towards something they weren't sure they agreed to, but weren't allowed to disagree with. There were others, boys your age, a few older, all looking like they'd just remembered they left a pie in the oven, back in childhood. No one talked, not really. One kid threw up behind a bush. Another tripped on his own sandals. You tried to look calm, you failed. And yet, somewhere beneath the fear, the nausea, the sudden awareness of how ill-fitting your tunic had become, you felt it. That small traitorous flicker of excitement. I'm a soldier now, you thought. It didn't last. 5 minutes later, you were handed a helmet that smelled like salted regret and shouted at for blinking at the wrong time. Orientation. No such thing. Just a shout. Line up! Then a louder shout. Wrong line! Then a third, more personal shout. Did your mother pack your ears with wool, or do you always move like a startled duck? You didn't answer. Someone behind you whispered, "Don't speak, ever." You nodded. You weren't in your village anymore. You were in the army, and Rome, as it turns out, was not big on easing you into things. You don't remember much of the walk to camp. Maybe it was the heat. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the small rock inside your left sandal, slowly soaring through your heel like it had something to prove. Either way, by the time you reached the camp gates, you'd forgotten what optimism felt like, and you were starting to miss your mother's burnt barley cakes. The first thing you noticed wasn't the walls, it was the smell. Not glory, not duty, not Rome, sweat, charcoal, and the unmistakable aroma of collective regret. A scent that only forms when hundreds of underfed men have lived, marched and slept too close together for too long, and no one's had a proper bath since the last lunar eclipse. It clung to your nostrils, got into your tunic, settled in your lungs like a permanent tenant. The second thing you noticed? The people. Bigger than you, dirtier than you, uninterested in your name, your dreams, or your charming village accent. One man was sharpening a sword that looked more rust than iron. Another was rubbing his armpits with what appeared to be a handful of sage. And disappointment. You tried to say hello. No one responded. You were a fresh fish tossed into an old, overboiled soup, and everyone around you had already learned to eat around the bones. You expected, perhaps, a welcome speech, a little orientation, a centurion with a chart, a map, a morale-building metaphor. Instead, you got a man with a stick and no patience. Bag over there, body over here, mouth shut. And that was that. You lined up, because that's what everyone else did. You took off your tunic, because someone screamed it loud enough to sound official, and you stood still, trying not to blink too loud. One recruit asked a question, a simple one, something about rations or sleeping mats. He was immediately handed a wooden plaque to wear around his neck that read, "I speak before thinking," and assigned to latrine duty. With a spoon, you learned fast. The afternoon blurred into a sequence of sharp noises and sharper corrections. Step forward. Too far, step back. Now too slow. Lift your chin. Not like that. Don't breathe like that. Stop existing so loudly. You thought military training might include team building, weapon drills, or discovering your inner warrior. What you got was, don't fall over, don't speak, and for Jupiter's sake, don't look the Optio in the eye. Somewhere around hour 3, you realised, this wasn't training, this was sanding. The soft edges of your personality, your ego, your preferences, scraped down to the grain. Dinner was half a loaf of barley and a ladle of warm vinegar water that called itself Posca with suspicious confidence. A man with no visible teeth handed it to you and said, "Tomorrow's worse. Eat fast." You chewed slowly, because chewing was the last independent decision you were allowed that day. As night fell, you sat on the edge of your assigned mat, if a fraying rectangle of mystery fibre counts as a mat, and stared up at the tent ceiling, where someone had patched a hole with a sock. The sock had a hole too. You tried not to read into it. Your back ached, your feet were blistered, your soul was somewhere between mildly bruised and has left the building, and it hit you. Rome doesn't need you to be brave, it just needs you to keep standing. And starting tomorrow, that will be your only job. You'd think that after a day like this, marching, shouting, being recategorized from human to unit, someone might say, "All right, rest now." They didn't. What you got was a direction, not an invitation. Tent 5, right side. Try not to step on anyone who bites. You ducked inside. The air was thick, damp, a combination of feet, damp wool, and that oddly universal male odour that develops when 8 strangers share their breath, and regrets under the same canvas. There were no beds, of course not. Just a row of mats laid out like fallen dominoes, each with a name scratched onto a piece of wood, or a sock, or in one case, someone's old jawbone. You found your spot, third from the left. right between a man who snored like a catapult launching gravel, and another who had been scratching his beard for, judging by the pile of flakes, most of the past decade. You sat. The mat had the consistency of gravel wrapped in a suggestion. Your blanket, a frayed rectangle of cloth that may have once been used to clean a sword, still smelled faintly of blood and cabbage. You lay back, slowly, cautiously, like a deer learning to trust again. You stared at the ceiling, just a ripple of fabric, sagging in the middle, like it had given up long before you did. A moth fluttered by, or a bat, or someone's escaped lunch. You made a mental note not to investigate. Somewhere in the corner, someone muttered in their sleep. Something about bread, or a goat, maybe both. Your body was screaming for rest, but rest apparently had other plans. Because just as your eyes started to close, the snorer let out a battle cry. The beard scratcher shifted and released a sigh that could be studied by philosophers. And outside a trumpet moaned, soft, low, judgmental. You sat back up. "Hey," you whispered to the only man who looked vaguely awake. "When does training start?" He blinked. "Tomorrow." A pause. "Or sooner." Another pause. "If you hear the horn, run." And then he turned over and began snoring in sync with the guy on the other end. Somehow, like they had practiced, you lay down again, tried to make peace with the mat, the smell, and the snoring symphony. You wrapped the blanket around your shoulders, like a sad tortilla. It didn't help. Your knees ached, your back had opinions. Your brain was somewhere between "please shut off" and "maybe we're dreaming this." You closed your eyes. Outside, footsteps, a shout, the clank of metal on metal. No alarm, just Rome, breathing in its sleep. Loudly, restlessly, like it too wasn't sure how this was going to work. And that was your first night. Not in the village, not under stars, but in a tent that creaked like it remembered better centuries, sharing air with 7 strangers, one moth, and possibly a divine lesson about humility. You didn't sleep. Not really. You drifted, between wakefulness and that strange ancient fog where the body stops arguing, but the soul is still filing complaints. You had officially arrived. And Rome? Rome was not impressed. Morning arrived without warning. No rooster, no sunrise poem. Just a trumpet blast that sounded like someone had jammed a goat into a bronze funnel and told it to scream. You rolled off your mat, not gracefully, more like a sack of grain with a bad attitude. Your knees cracked, your back whimpered, your stomach reminded you, politely at first, then with increasing authority, that you hadn't eaten since before Rome happened to you. So you followed the line. Not because anyone told you to, but because that's what everyone else was doing, and you were too tired to be curious. Breakfast was a concept. A ladle of warm barley mush, with the texture of soggy parchment and the emotional resonance of wet rope. Next to it, a shallow cup of posca, vinegar and water, served at the precise temperature of disappointment. You looked for a spoon. There wasn't one. A man next to you was using his fingers. Another had fashioned something that might have once been part of a belt buckle. You opted for fingers, because dignity had already left the building sometime around lights out. You sat on a log that doubled as a bench and a back stretcher. The sun was just peeking over the edge of the world, hesitant, like even it wasn't sure this was a good idea. Your first bite tasted hot and bland, like someone had once heard about flavour and decided it was for officers only. You chewed, then chewed again, then made the conscious decision to stop analysing. A fly landed on the rim of your cup. You didn't swat it away. You were genuinely unsure whether it was part of the recipe. Somewhere nearby, a man with fewer teeth than years leaned over and smiled. "Best meal you'll have all week," he said, with the kind of optimism that bordered on satire. You nodded, because what else could you do? Cry, laugh, eat the fly for protein? None of those felt like winning options. The barley mush clung to your insides, not in a comforting way, more like a tenant that doesn't pay rent but leaves dishes in the sink. The vinegar water posca, as they called it, went down like regret aged in clay. But it was wet, and that was enough. No one talked. Just the soft scrape of bowls, the occasional cough, and one man humming what might have been a lullaby or a threat. It was oddly peaceful. Not because it was nice, but because resistance had gone out of fashion. You finished everything, every drop, every grain, not out of hunger, out of instinct. Because here food wasn't a reward, it was a reprieve, temporary, unemotional, essential. You licked your fingers, not proudly, not shamefully, just functionally. And it hit you then, as the sun climbed a little higher and the flies got a little bolder. This place didn't want you to be strong, or clever, or brave. It didn't care if you believed in the cause, or if you could recite the names of Rome's founders, or if you'd ever held a sword. All it needed from you, truly, was that you didn't die before lunch. That was the bar. Survival, not greatness, not growth. Just get to the next meal, and maybe, if you were lucky, there'd be fewer flies. But it wasn't always like this. Before the drills, the marching, the vinegar breakfasts, and the rotting boots, there was the farm. And Rome, before it was a machine, was a field. In the early days, Rome didn't have soldiers. It had farmers. And those farmers were really, really bad at saying no. When war came, and war always came, someone rode into the village square, unfurled a list and started shouting names. There were no arguments, no appeals, just a look from your father, a sigh from your mother, and the quiet knowledge that barley season would have to wait. You didn't join the army. You got drafted out of planting season. One moment, you were fixing a broken yoke. The next, you were holding a spear that hadn't been cleaned since your cousin's last campaign. You packed what you had, a patched tunic, a water skin with questionable intentions, and a pair of sandals that were never meant to meet northern mud. If you had money, which you didn't, you bought your own shield. If not, you borrowed one, or walked behind someone with better luck and hoped they dropped theirs. There was no uniform, no centralized gear, just a bunch of men with tired eyes and sunburned necks trying to remember which side they were supposed to be on. Armor, optional, sword, if you could afford it. Otherwise a sharpened hoe would do, and if that wasn't available, well, the Romans were always creative, and so they walked, south to face the Etruscans, north to poke at the Gauls, east to somewhere they couldn't pronounce. They carried no pride in banners, just blisters and the low-level panic of men who know they left the gate open at home. Some didn't come back. Those who did returned with fewer teeth, new stories, and one common wish. Please let the rains be late this year. You see, war wasn't a career. It was a very loud, very bloody interruption. The field you left didn't pause. Weeds grew, tools rusted. Your younger brother tried his best, but the goats always liked you better. Rome didn't pay. You fought for duty, for land, for that vague idea that if you didn't fight, the neighbours would come steal your cows. That was enough. No one saluted, no one practiced formation. Mostly you lined up, tried not to stab your own foot, and waited for someone louder to yell, "Advance!" It was messy, it was confused, and it worked just well enough to keep doing it again. Organised chaos, someone once called it. But that was generous. It was more like unorganised resentment with pointy sticks. And yet, there was something solid in it. You knew the men beside you, your cousin, the baker's son, the man who lent you rope last harvest. You fought beside people whose chickens you had once chased, whose bread you had stolen as a child. That mattered. It didn't make the fight cleaner, just a little less lonely. At night, you sat by the fire, burnt barley in your teeth, the copper taste of blood still lingering, and you'd wonder, was the field back home missing you? Were the weeds winning? Did your sister remember to check the beehives? That was the Roman army back then. Not glory, not legacy, just men with dirt in their boots, spears in their hands, and fields waiting behind them. And when the campaign was over, if it ended, you didn't stay. You walked home. You picked up your hoe, and you prayed the frost hadn't come early. But as Rome grew, the interruptions came more often. The enemies got bolder. The marching got longer, and the city began to wonder, What if the men didn't go home? What if they stayed? What if war wasn't a seasonal job, but a system? That's when everything changed. And that's what we'll look at next. That's when everything changed. And that's what we'll look at next. Rome, you see, had a problem. It was winning. And winning meant more land, more borders, more enemies who didn't know when to give up. The farmer-soldier model? That didn't scale. Wars were coming faster than the wheat could grow. And it's hard to defend a frontier when half your army needs to go home and prune olive trees. So Rome did what Rome always did best. It organised. No more grab your hoe and hope. Now the army had a system. They called it the Manipular Legion, named for the maniples, flexible blocks of infantry that could bend, pivot, adapt. And for the first time, a Roman army didn't just look like a crowd with good intentions. It looked like a machine, a beautiful one, from the outside. But if you were inside it, you didn't get to admire the gears. You were one. Soldiers were sorted by age, by experience, and by income. The young and poor, front lines, a spear, a light cuirass, and all the glory you could earn before your second birthday, in uniform. The older, stronger, richer men, behind them. Heavier armour, better weapons, better odds, and the oldest, wisest, and best equipped. Held in reserve, because if they had to fight, it usually meant things had gone very, very wrong. You didn't choose your place. You got placed like a tool on a shelf, ranked not by merit, but by tax bracket. It wasn't fair, but it was effective. And in Rome, that counted for more. And if you were the one holding the spear in front, fairness wasn't even on the menu, just survival, and maybe a slightly slower death. You trained with wooden swords twice as heavy as the real thing. You drilled until your feet bled through your sandals. You stood still in the sun until you forgot how to blink. Your life became measured in formations, and formations only. March, stop, hold, die maybe. And when you were finally deemed ready, not eager, not brave, just sufficiently shaped, you were assigned your place in the great formation. Left flank, centre line, front row, back reserve. Your job wasn't to ask, just to fit. You weren't a man anymore. You were formation material, replaceable, silent, prearranged. You no longer marched with neighbours. You marched with strangers. With the understanding that strangers were easier to replace, and the truth is, no one noticed when someone disappeared. They just tightened the line. And still, somehow, this wasn't cruelty. It was discipline. Because Rome was no longer just defending itself. It was expanding. And expansion, in Roman terms, was less reach out and more press forward until someone breaks. The army had become a tool. But tools need to be sharp. And sharpness came at a price. You trained like steel, but you broke like clay. Take, for example, Titus Manlius Torquatus, a name you don't have to remember, but a story you probably should. His son, also named Titus because Roman creativity ended with conquest, once disobeyed orders. He left the line, fought an enemy in single combat, won, brought back the spoils, and his father, the general, had him executed, publicly, without hesitation, not because he lost, not because he brought shame, but because he acted without orders. That was the lesson. In Rome's new army, glory didn't come from bravery, it came from obedience. You learned quickly, if you think for yourself, you die alone. If you follow orders, you die in formation. Rome preferred the second. From this point on, the Roman soldier stopped being a man who joined the war. He became a part of it, a living component, a breathing cog in an engine that didn't slow down. Your name wasn't as important as your rank. Your thoughts weren't as valuable as your formation. And your survival? Secondary to the movement of the line. You didn't live for Rome. You functioned for it. Still, the ideal persisted, that you were serving not just a state, but a cause. Service to Rome is the highest honour, they said. To die for the Republic is to live forever in glory. You didn't believe it, of course, but you marched to it anyway, because belief was optional, but formation was not. So yes, Rome learned not how to be fair, but how to be efficient. It carved men into ranks, drilled them into rhythm, and burned hesitation out of their bones. And when they marched, it was no longer a group of farmers in sandals. It was a system, brutal, beautiful, and beginning to think of conquest as something permanent. But conquest needed more than discipline. It needed durability. It needed bodies that didn't complain, and backs that didn't break. Which brings us to the next chapter of the Roman soldier, not the disciplined citizen, but the professional mule. Then came Marius, and everything changed, mostly your back. Gaius Marius, 7-time consul, war hero, people's champion. But for our purposes, he's best remembered as the man who looked at Rome's growing list of problems and said, let's fix this by making everyone really, really tired. Before Marius, the army had rules. You had to own land. You had to be a citizen of means. You had to bring your own stuff. After Marius, if you had a pulse and a spine, you were welcome. He opened the legions to Rome's poorest, the capite censi, the head count, men who had nothing, no property, no prospects, no sandals that matched, and Rome gave them everything: armour, weapons, food, purpose. In return, they gave Rome everything too, including the right to tell them when, where, and how to die. And they didn't just fight, they carried. They carried their shields, their swords, their tents, their cookware, their rations, their shovel, their pickaxe, their extra sandals, and possibly the emotional weight of an entire empire that never said thank you. The marching column was now a self-contained mobile city, with soldiers as both inhabitants and infrastructure, and they marched 30 kilometers a day, minimum, rain or shine, sore or bleeding, uphill or slightly more uphill. They marched until their legs forgot they used to be civilian legs, until sleep became a hallucination, and the only dream was to sit down for longer than 5 minutes. They were nicknamed Marius's mules, not metaphorically, literally. And if you're picturing a pack animal dragging a cart of potatoes, congratulations. You're still romanticising it. In battle, these men were steel. But between battles, they were donkeys with opinions. When they weren't fighting, they were digging. Trenches, latrines, camp foundations. They built fortifications like engineers, cooked like field chefs, and died like labourers with excellent posture. The Roman army, at this point, wasn't a force. It was a logistics miracle, wearing sandals. And what did they get in return? A promise, a chunk of land when their time was done. Maybe, if the general they served remembered, if the Senate wasn't too busy being corrupt, if the war didn't drag on for another decade. It was a pension plan written in sand, but it was more than nothing. And for men who had started with less than nothing, that sounded almost like hope. There was pride in it too. These weren't pampered aristocrats sipping watered wine. They were the backbone of conquest. They made the legions mobile, made the empire scalable. You could drop them in Gaul, in Africa, in Britannia, and by nightfall they'd have a camp, a latrine system, and a rotation for who had to clean it. Rome didn't conquer the world because it had better generals. It conquered the world because its soldiers brought their own shovels. But make no mistake, it sucked. It sucked in 1,000 slow grinding ways. The aching shoulders, the infected blisters, the tent mate who snored like a dying elephant, the rain that turned your kit into a muddy backpack of sadness, the endless repetition of dig, march, eat, dig, maybe fight, dig again. Victory was paid for in back pain, and nobody ever wrote a poem about that. But the system worked. Rome became unstoppable, not because its enemies were weak, but because its soldiers were tired and kept moving anyway, because rest wasn't part of the plan, only momentum. And so the Roman soldier, once a part-time farmer with a rusty spear, was now a full-time machine, efficient, enduring, not glorious, not celebrated, just necessary, just there. And the next time you hear about Rome's greatness, The golden eagles, the marble roads, the proud legions at the edges of the known world. Remember this. Someone got those eagles there. Someone carried the road gravel. Someone walked it, barefoot, blistered, and too tired to curse properly. And that, right there, is why it sucked to be a Roman soldier. By now, the Roman soldier wasn't just a man with a sword. He was a machine part, sharpened and sanded, fitted into the great engine of conquest. But every part had a shape, a role, a place on the field. Which brings us to you. If you were dropped into that formation, where would they put you? Let's take a look. So, you've been drafted. No way out, no escape scroll. The centurion yells your name, and now it's time to stand in line. But where? You've seen the system. 3 neat lines of infantry, a few horsemen off to the side polishing their egos. And you, sweaty, underfed, undertrained, somewhere in the mess, hoping no one notices your left sandal is held together by prayer. Welcome to the Roman army. Not as a symbol, not as a citizen, as a unit, a numbered, lined up, hopefully still breathing cog. But before the marching starts, before the yelling gets serious, you're told to step forward. They're assigning positions. No, not based on your dreams, not based on your zodiac sign, or whether you did cardio this morning. It's about age, gear, stamina, and sometimes pure dumb luck. In front you've got the young ones, fast, brave, mildly flammable. Behind them the experienced, the reliable, the please don't mess this up again crowd. At the back, the old, the steady, the ones who know what fear smells like and have chosen to ignore it. And then, of course, there are the horsemen, off to the side, slightly above it all, galloping in with flair, leaving early if things go wrong. So here's the question. Where would you be? If this were a game, it's time to choose your soldier class. Speed, defense, survivability, all good options, all roads that probably end in trench foot, saddle sores, or a very awkward limp. But still, you get to pick, or at least pretend to. So let's walk through the lineup, one by one, from the front lines to the horsemen in the distance. You might not like where you end up, but hey, that's Rome. So let's say they put you at the front. Not because you're brave, not because you're skilled, but because you're young. Poor, fast, disposable, welcome to the velites. You wear a wolf pelt over your helmet, not because it's intimidating, but because it's all they had left in the armory. You carry a short spear, maybe 3 if the quartermaster was in a generous mood. You're not here to hold the line. You're here to poke it, poke the enemy, provoke, distract, run. In fact, run is kind of your thing. Your job is to dart forward, chuck your spears, and immediately get out of the way before the real fighting starts. You don't wear heavy armor, not because you're agile, but because armor costs money, and you don't have any. Your defense is speed, your strategy is survival. Your greatest asset is the ability to disappear behind someone with a shield the moment things get loud. You are, essentially, the warm-up act. If the battle were a play, you'd be the guy who juggles fruit before the main actors come on stage. You sleep in the worst spot in the tent. You eat last. You're the youngest, the smallest, and the most likely to be volunteered for latrine duty. But still, there's a strange kind of pride to it. You're first into the fight, first to test the enemy, first to learn if the opposing archers had a good breakfast. You don't carry the heaviest weight, but you carry the first fear. History won't remember your name. Most of your commanders won't either. But the guy behind you, the one in proper armor with the expensive helmet, he survives because you were fast enough to keep the spears pointed the other way. So if you ever dreamed of being both athletic and frequently ignored by history books, congratulations, you're a velite. But let's say you've aged out of that. You've survived your spear throwing, sprinting, not dying years. Maybe you even found a few coins. Enough for a proper helmet. Not enough for comfort. Certainly not enough for a better job. Congratulations, you're hastati now. You're in your early 20s. You're stronger than you used to be. Smell worse too. But that's normal. You carry a short sword, a gladius, a shield big enough to duck behind, and the distinct sense that whatever happens today it's probably happening to you first, because you're the first line of attack. Not just the first to see the enemy, the first to feel them. Up close, personal, occasionally inside your ribcage, you stand shoulder to shoulder with dozens of others like you, sweaty, nervous, and trying very hard not to be the first one to throw up. You're trained to charge, not to ask questions, not to reflect, just to shout and move forward. Because hastati don't ask why, they just yell and run, usually forward, occasionally sideways, rarely back, because that gets you stabbed from behind and demoted to example. You fight with enthusiasm, not elegance. The principes behind you, they've seen stuff, they judge you quietly, but they'll step up when you inevitably get tired, stabbed, or slightly on fire. That's the rhythm of it. You push, you break, they cover, you learn this pattern quickly, or you don't learn much else again. But you're proud. You're not a scout anymore. You're not just bait with good cardio. You're in the fight, properly, officially. And for a few shining minutes before the formations start to blur and your arms get heavy, you feel like a real Roman. Brave, loud, sweaty, breakable. Brave, loud, sweaty, breakable. And when that happens, when the front line stumbles, wavers, or just straight up collapses, you step in. Mid-30s, knees click, back stiff. Your principes, you've seen combat, you've buried friends, you've stopped naming your sandals because you know how often they die. Your gear is better. Your sword's been sharpened more times than you can count. Your shield has dents from real things, not training dummies. You don't shout anymore. You speak low, because when you speak, people actually listen. You stand in the second line, right behind the hastati, close enough to see what's going wrong, far enough to pretend it's not your fault. But you know the truth. You're the line that holds. When the young ones falter, when their courage outruns their stamina, you move forward. Quiet, steady, focused. You don't charge. You reinforce. You plug holes. You catch what falls. You're the spine of the legion. No one cheers for the spine. But if it breaks, game over. You don't move fast. You don't look glorious. But you stay standing. That's your superpower now. Not speed, not strength. Just persistence. The kind that says, I've had worse to everything, including meals, weather, and sword wounds. The hastati think you're old. The triari think you're still an intern. But the truth is, you're the one who knows how to keep people alive long enough to become old or wise. Whichever comes first. You don't write the stories, but you keep the story going. And when the battle ends, if it ends, you're the one still breathing hard, counting heads, and making sure someone lights the fire. Not fast, not flashy, just alive, mostly. And then there's you, over 40, spine like an old ladder, eyes that don't blink unless it's necessary. You don't speak often, you don't need to, because when a triarius steps forward, everyone else shuts up. It means something's gone wrong. It always does. You stand at the back, not out of cowardice, out of trust. You're the final line, the anchor, the quiet wall that no one expects to move, until it does. And when you do move, the enemy usually regrets it. You don't run, you don't chase, you end things. A triarius doesn't panic, doesn't scream, doesn't need to. He's seen worse, he's buried worse. Your armor is heavier, your joints louder, your sword duller but reliable. You're not here to impress, you're here to finish. Younger soldiers avoid eye contact with you, not out of fear, but because they know you see through bravado like fog through a valley. You can smell false courage and blood, and the rain half a day before it falls. You've outlived legions, outwalked storms, outlasted politics. And now, when the formation wobbles, when the shouting stops and the screaming starts, they call your name. You sigh, pick up your shield, and move forward. One more time, just like the last time, just like the next. You don't look like salvation. But right now, you're the closest thing anyone's got. You don't look like salvation. But right now, you're the closest thing anyone's got. Except, of course, for the guy on the horse, with the polished armor, the perfect posture, and the haircut that says, I haven't dug a ditch in my life. That's an ekis. Got a horse? Nice teeth? Rings on your fingers? Your equities. You come from money. You ride like you mean it. And you carry messages, outflank enemies, and occasionally show up late with dramatic timing. You're not in the line. You're on the edges, on the move, somewhere between scout and shock troop and personal delivery service, for whichever general is yelling the loudest today. You're fast, flashy, and technically expendable, though no one says that part out loud. You get better food, better tents, and the best chance of dying very far from help. Because when you're out there, galloping through forests or chasing down fleeing infantry, there's no one to cover you. Just the wind, the mud, and the distant realization that glory doesn't travel as fast as arrows. Equities often get the credit. Sometimes they even deserve it, but they rarely get the closure. Die in the ranks, they bury you with honours. Die behind enemy lines, they shrug and send another horse. Still, you ride with style. Your armour shines longer. Your death, when it comes, might even be poetic if someone's watching. Fast, rich, stylish, and sometimes very alone. So, where do you think you'd land? Up front with the velites? Fast hands, fast feet, no armour, no fame. A blur of movement and adrenaline, forgotten by lunch, or behind them, as a hastatus, a bit of metal, a bit of pride, and a lot of very real, very sharp reality? Maybe as a principes, back straighter, heart wearier, holding the centre not for glory, but because if you don't, no one else will. Or maybe you're a triarius, older, quieter. You don't talk much anymore, but when you move, people notice, because it means something's broken, and it's your job to hold it together, just one more time. Or perhaps you're on horseback, an ekes, riding wide arcs through the field, trusted with speed, decorated with style, and left sometimes to die out of sight. Every place in the line has its weight, every role has its price. There's no soft landing in a Roman formation. Some bled first, some lasted longer, but no one stood still. In the end, the real role wasn't what you carried, but how long you kept walking. And speaking of walking, it starts again tomorrow. You don't wake up, you're woken. The trumpet doesn't ask, it declares, sharp, metallic, too early to be legal. Your eyes sting, half from smoke, half from sleep you never really earned. Your tunic is still damp from yesterday's sweat, and someone's elbow is in your ribs, again. Breakfast? A bowl of barley mash, cold, sticky, and suspiciously grey. A cup of warm vinegar water that calls itself posca, but tastes like punishment. No coffee, no firelight chats, just chewing. Fast, mechanical, you eat quickly, not because you're hungry, but because your spoon is also your shovel. And there are miles ahead, always more miles. And there are miles ahead, always more miles. So you pack, not lightly, not smartly, just completely. Because every Roman soldier is also part pack mule. And Rome, bless her efficient little heart, made sure you carried your share. Your shield alone, the scutum, is almost the size of a door, and just as heavy. Your armour, lorica hamata, or segmentata if the gods were generous, wraps around your torso like an iron hug you never asked for. Your sword, gladius, short and pragmatic. Your dagger, because 2 blades are better than 1. 2 wooden stakes, pila muralia, for building the camp fence every single night. A shovel or an axe. Whichever you get, it's the wrong one. A sling bag filled with barley, salt, a dented cooking pot, a cracked spoon, rope, flint, whetstone, and at least one thing you forgot you were carrying since last spring. Total weight, 30 to 40 kilograms. Give or take your soul. If it clanked, you carried it. If it didn't, it still somehow made noise. Even your dreams started sounding like a kitchen falling downstairs. You don't walk so much as drag your belongings forward by willpower. Every step is a negotiation with gravity. Every incline is personal. Sandals, made for walking, not for carrying a small war economy on your spine. And still, you don't complain. Not out loud, because the centurion is watching, because the guy next to you looks more miserable, because if you say something, someone might add something to your pack. just to teach you humility. So you shift the weight, adjust the strap, and take the next step, one more and one more after that. Welcome to the march, 20 to 30 kilometers, every single day. The sun comes up angry, all heat, no charm, no trees, no breeze, just the Mediterranean sky, stretched tight like a drum over your burning shoulders. You don't get shade, you don't get breaks, you get dust, and if the gods are feeling generous, mud. That's the dream, not comfort, just slightly cooler misery. The road beneath you, a mix of gravel, stone, regret. Roman engineering is legendary, especially when it's stabbing your heel for the 12th kilometre. The sandals, they're well made, for someone else's feet, in theory. You walk in formation, no drifting, no chatting, just the sound of 100 legs trying not to collapse in sync. Your cohort moves like a centipede in armour, each segment relying on the others not to fall apart. There's rhythm, there's pace, there's always someone yelling when either of those goes wrong. Step wrong, get called out. Slow down, get shouted at. Speak without permission, get to carry something extra for the rest of the day. Like your dignity in pieces, the march has rules. They are not written down, but they are enforced, loudly, repeatedly. Sometimes with sticks. You don't talk, you don't think. You count steps, hours, the number of times your foot hits the same blister spot. You dream about water, then you remember what your posca tastes like and stop. And still, you keep moving. Not because you want to, not because you believe in the mission, but because the man in front of you hasn't stopped, and you don't want to be the first to ruin the line. If you've ever complained about 10,000 steps, please sit down. Preferably not on a Roman road. It's still hot, and probably occupied. You march until the sun drops behind the hills, until your legs move without consulting your brain, until you forget where the pain started and just accept that it's part of you now. The end of the road? That's not a finish line. That's just where the digging starts. But before your hands touch the dirt, your body takes inventory. Your feet, raw, blistered, somewhere between skin and soup. Your shoulders, braced like a collapsing roof, carrying a weight they've started to think is permanent. Your back doesn't ache anymore. It hums. A low, dull music you didn't ask for, played in C minor, with rocks for notes. Sweat drips into your eyes. Salt stings. But you've stopped wiping it. It just makes the dust stick worse. Your mouth is dry, but your teeth feel gritty. Like someone packed your rations in a gravel pit. Around you, the clank of armour, the slap of sandals, the creak of leather straps complaining, like they've had a long day too. Occasionally, someone coughs. No one says bless you. Your whole world shrinks to one thing: endure. You stop naming the aches. There are too many, and they all sound the same now. Instead, you start naming the good things. A breeze, shade, a dry sock, they become your new pantheon. Small gods, worshipped in silence. And when one of them appears, just for a moment, you let yourself smile. Not wide, not for long. Just enough to remember there's still a human somewhere inside the armour. Not wide, not for long. Just enough to remember there's still a human somewhere inside the armour. And then you arrive, but you're not done. No applause, no tents waiting. No one saying, good job. Just an open field, rocks, dirt, maybe a patch of grass brave enough to survive 1,000 footsteps. Your reward for surviving the march, a shovel, because now you build the camp, every night, from scratch, trenches dug, stakes driven, perimeters measured to the inch. Every man has a place, every tent has an angle, and if anything's off, you redo it. No one speaks much, words take energy, and the ground doesn't care about your opinion anyway. You dig, you hammer, you wipe the blood from your palm, and keep going, because the next guy is watching. Not to help, just to make sure you don't slow him down. The centurion walks the lines, eyes sharp, voice sharper. He doesn't yell for effect. He yells because it works. Your feet scream, your hands tremble, but the centurion's voice is louder. When the walls go up, you move to the gates. When the gates are done, someone's already dividing the firewood. And when you finally sit, if you sit, it's only because your body has decided to ignore the next order for just a moment. This isn't rest, it's just a pause between burdens. And in the Roman army, even that feels like luxury. The march is over. But rest is an illusion. Because in the Roman army, the end of one task is the start of the next. And tomorrow, you'll do it again. The march ends, the work begins, you stop walking, but that doesn't mean you rest. Because in the Roman army, there is no there. No safe arrival, no moment to exhale. There's just the next task, which looks suspiciously like the last one, but now with shovels. Every stop is a site, every site is a structure, and every structure is a statement. We're still here, and we still have energy to dig. The enemy might not see you yet, but the trench will. The wall will. The gate you haven't built yet already knows your name. The wall will. The gate you haven't built yet already knows your name. Because this isn't just a camp, it's a blueprint, a living diagram, a temporary city that must look the same, feel the same, function the same, no matter where it's built. Every Roman camp follows a plan, rigid, geometric, like someone looked at chaos and decided to draw lines through it. There's a main road, the Via Principalis, a central plaza, a commander's tent, always at the heart, always facing east. Rows of tents flanking it, like ribs around a spine. There's even a designated corner for tying up the mules. Because if your logistics are confused, your war is already over. Your tent, it houses 8 men. Always the same 8, same position, same layout. Every night, every campaign, you could find your spot blindfolded, and sometimes you do. If you pitch your tent in the wrong place, you don't just annoy your tent mates, you break the spine of the entire army. Because when morning comes and the horns blow, the formation doesn't wait for oops, it assumes you're in position. That your sword is where it should be. That your body will move where it was trained to. One misaligned tent is one misplaced soldier, and in battle, that's all it takes. So you measure, you align, you hammer down your corner of the empire, not because you care about symmetry, but because Rome does. Not because you care about symmetry, but because Rome does, and Rome has rules. The camp isn't built, it's summoned, recreated every night. Like a ritual carved into dust, same steps, same hands, same exhaustion, recycled and redistributed like a sacred burden. Step 1. Measure. The centurion paces the edges. A junior officer follows, planting markers. The layout is marked out with ropes, pegs, and the unspoken dread of digging in the wrong place. Step 2. Dig. Everyone digs. Veterans, recruits, cooks if they're caught standing still. The trench goes around the entire perimeter. Not deep enough to stop an army, just deep enough to make anyone trip, scream, and buy you a few seconds. Depth, about up to your thigh, which you now know better than to underestimate. Step 3. Fence. You hammer the stakes, pala muralia, into the soil. One by one. They interlock, forming a jagged wooden crown around the camp. Not pretty, just effective. And when the light hits just right, it makes your camp look like a hedgehog preparing for war. Step 4. Tents and schedules. Your group knows exactly where to go. No guessing, no shifting around. The centurion calls out the watch rotation. Who guards first, who guards last, who doesn't sleep at all. You pretend not to groan. Everyone hears it anyway. It's like building a small town. One that has to disappear by morning. Streets, borders, homes, a central command. All put together with wooden stakes and sheer spite. And there are no bystanders. No one says, I'm not good at digging. No one says that's not my job. You dig, or you get reassigned to something worse. Usually still digging. Some handle fences, some haul gear, some cook, but they also dig. Rome believes in cross-training through exhaustion. And when it's done, when the last stake is driven and the final trench kicked into place, no one cheers. They just sit, or lean, or blink in the darkness and try to remember what their fingers felt like before shovels. They just sit, or lean, or blink in the darkness and try to remember what their fingers felt like before shovels, and then the centurion checks the perimeter, because even exhaustion has to pass inspection. Pitch your tent a meter too far left? Tear it down. Do it again. Forgot to sharpen your stakes? Redo the fence, with fewer breaks. Someone tripped in your trench? Hope it wasn't an officer. Hope it wasn't fatal. There's no such thing as close enough. Not in a system where the enemy doesn't send warnings, only arrows. In the Roman army, the cost of your mistake is never just yours. It's the man beside you, the line behind you, the camp that now sleeps with one eye open because your shovel was off by a palm's width. And then there's the guard duty. 4 watches a night, each with its own weight, its own hour where sleep fights duty. If you're caught dozing on post, torture, execution, or decimation, not because they hate you, but because they need the rest of the camp to keep breathing. You learn quickly that fear is a better alarm clock than discipline, and that perfection isn't expected, it's required. If you're weak, there's still a place for you. It's called logistics. Sounds forgiving. Until you realize logistics means hauling firewood, fetching water, digging latrines, burning waste, carrying things no one else wants to carry, including the body of the last guy who complained. It's not easier, just less honourable, and with fewer breaks. In a world where order is survival, even the smoke rises on schedule. So what happens when the last trench is dug, the last stake hammered, and the camp finally stands? You don't sleep. Not all at once, not together. The night is broken into 4 watches. You're assigned 1, maybe 2 if someone's sick, or missing, or dead. You try to close your eyes between shifts, but the dirt is cold, your armour's still on, and your spine keeps whispering the names of every rock beneath you. If you're not on watch, you're still not resting. You're drying your boots over a weak flame, scraping rust off your blade, stitching your sandal strap back into something that resembles hope, or just lying there, absolutely still, trying to convince your bones to stop buzzing. The fire stays low, by design. Flames attract eyes, eyes attract arrows. And you've had enough of those. No songs, no laughter, no stories by the fire. Just the crackle of coals and the occasional cough. And in that silence, not peace, just discipline. The camp doesn't sleep. It breathes, slow, rhythmic, like a creature trained to exhale only when no one's watching. You listen. To the rustle of canvas, the shuffle of sandals on gravel, the faint murmur of a man talking in his sleep, maybe to someone he left behind, maybe to someone he hasn't met yet. The night is short, but it feels long, and when the trumpet calls again, you won't feel rested, you'll feel expected. By morning it's gone, the trench is filled, the stakes pulled, the tents rolled tight like secrets, and the entire camp, everything you built last night, vanishes into dust and boot prints. But for a few dark hours, it stood, not as a home, not even as a shelter, but as the last square of order in a world that didn't care whether you made it to sunrise. You weren't safe, you weren't warm, you weren't rested, but you were placed, aligned, counted, and somehow, in the middle of nothing, that was enough. Tomorrow, you'll march again, build again, guard again, ache again, but for now, the camp sleeps, eyes half open, blades within reach, breathing slow, like an animal trained not to dream. The camp breathes, but before it sleeps, before the body dares to ask for stillness, there's one final act, eating. They call it dinner. That's generous. There's no table, no scent of stew drifting across the fire, no warm loaves passed from calloused hand to hand. Just you, your bowl, and whatever hasn't spoiled since yesterday. The line for food is slow, not because there's a lot of it, but because no one wants to be first to taste what barley has become after 12 hours in a dented pot and someone else's sweat. You sit where there's space, a tent edge, a stone, your own pack. You hold your food like it might get away. You chew slowly, not out of etiquette, but because there's no rush toward disappointment. This isn't a meal, it's an act of maintenance, a quiet, necessary negotiation with the body. Here, take this. Stay upright tomorrow. The bowl is warm. That's the only nice thing you can say about it. Inside, barley mash. Not barley soup, not porridge, not anything with ambition. Just barley, boiled until it forgets it was ever alive, stirred with water that may or may not have been fully convinced of its cleanliness, and left to congeal into a flavoured memory of food. The texture is somewhere between glue and regret, sticky enough to coat your mouth, soft enough to remind you that your teeth aren't being challenged this evening. You eat it with whatever you've got. A spoon if it hasn't cracked. A sliver of wood carved from yesterday's shield repair. Your fingers if you've already given up on decorum and dreams. No one's judging, everyone's chewing. If the cook's in a good mood, there's salt. If not, there's not. Some days the barley is soupy. Other days you can slice it. Occasionally it fights back. No one complains. Complaints imply expectations. Next to the bowl is your drink, posca, a Roman classic. Water and vinegar, equal parts hydration and humility. Warm, slightly sour, and designed less for pleasure than for making sure what you just ate doesn't kill you. The first sip always shocks the tongue. The second is easier. By the third, your mouth has decided to stop filing complaints. You don't taste it after that. That's the point. And then, if the gods are watching, or if someone traded well that morning, you might find an olive. Just one. Wrinkled, slightly bitter, suspiciously chewy. Still, it's a luxury, a greenish-grey sphere of concentrated nostalgia. You eat it slowly, like it's holy, because it is, rarer than thanks from a centurion. The mash fills your stomach. The posca numbs your tongue. The olive reminds you that taste is still possible. It's not a feast, it's not even dinner, but it's fuel. And for tonight, that's all Rome is offering. The barley mash is done. The bowl is empty. But your nose twitches. Meat. Somewhere in the camp something is cooking. And it doesn't smell like starch or vinegar or disappointment. It smells savoury, slightly burned, suspiciously hopeful. Someone's eating well tonight. You don't look, you don't ask. You just let the scent drift past like a song from someone else's childhood. In the Roman ranks, being issued meat is rare. When it happens, it feels like a promotion, like your name just got bumped up one tier on some invisible list of men who matter. But what is meat? That depends. It might be a rat, a small brave bird, something with 4 legs and bad luck. If it ran slower than a tired legionary, it's eligible. No one judges, because tonight it's him. Tomorrow it might be you. And hunger is excellent at silencing opinions. Sometimes it's dried beef from a week ago, soaked, reboiled, seasoned with wishful thinking. Chewy enough to build jaw strength, salty enough to make you forget everything else, lacks flavour. It's been cooked and recooked until bacteria give up and move on. Other times it's unidentifiable, dark, shiny, resembling meat in shape more than in spirit. You chew, you don't ask. If it makes your stomach stay quiet, it's good enough. One night, a man swore he roasted a squirrel. Another claimed it was a pigeon. No one argued, because the smell was real, and the bones were gone by the time he finished his story. If you smell meat, someone is either lucky or lying. Sometimes both. You tell yourself it's fine. You weren't that hungry anyway. The barley was filling. The posca was sharp. But the scent stays with you, like a song you half remember, or a childhood meal you forgot you missed. The scent of meat fades. The bowls are mostly empty. And the camp shifts from eating to sharpening. Because in the Roman army, there is no quartermaster miracle, no smiling man with a clipboard asking, "How's your armour holding up today?" There are no spare swords, no free straps, no magical replacements, just you, your gear, and whatever thread, rope or patience you didn't use up yesterday. So you work. Your gladius gets the whetstone. Short, heavy, brutally honest. It doesn't need to be pretty. It just needs to split what it hits. Your spearhead gets a once-over. Is it loose, bent, still capable of convincing someone else to keep their distance? You give it a twist, a test jab. Satisfactory. For now, your armour straps, one is fraying. You tie it off with a piece of braided cord from someone's discarded sandal. Resourceful? Yes. Fashionable? Number effective? Absolutely. Someone nearby is fixing a sandal. Left became right. Sole became patch. A new hole became a new knot. No one complains. Everyone adjusts. Your sword is your best friend, someone mutters. And no one laughs, because it's true. It's sad, but it's accurate. Friends die, swords stay, if you keep them clean. There's a man 2 tents down who once fought with a cracked blade. The crack grew. So did the wound in his side. Now he checks every night. Like a man who learned the hard way that steel doesn't warn twice. You don't polish for glory, you sharpen for certainty, because when the horn blows tomorrow, you don't want your weapon to hesitate. That's your job. The sharpening stops, the camp settles, no one talks loudly, not because it's forbidden, but because volume takes energy, and energy is something you now spend with intention. Someone chuckles, not laughs, just that short, breathy sound you make when someone says they tripped into a trench and landed face first in a dead scorpion. Again. It's not funny, but it's not tragic either. And in the Roman army, that makes it comedy. The fire burns small, low, controlled, just enough to see your fingers. Not enough to cast shadows the wrong way. You sit close, not for warmth, but because you're tired of distances. The flames flicker. They don't dance. They breathe, like everything else in the camp. Some nights there's wind. It drifts in slow low to the ground, carries the scent of olive trees far away, or the iron tang of something not buried well enough. You don't ask which, you just breathe through your mouth and let it pass. Around you, tents murmur. Men shift, someone coughs. Another whispers, a prayer into a sleeve. No one listens, everyone hears. This isn't peace, but it's not war either. It's the space between, where pain quiets, and hope, if it's there, keeps its head down. You're not full, you're not comfortable, you're not optimistic, but you're not dead. And tonight, that's a win. You finish eating, not because you're full, but because there's nothing left. The bowl is scraped, the fire is fading, the last cough has come and gone, and someone is already snoring in a rhythm that almost sounds like marching. You don't say goodnight, you don't lie flat, you just shift into a shape that hurts slightly less than the last one. You listen, for footsteps, for names being called, for your own. You eat quietly, because the next sound might be your turn to stand guard. And that spoon you're holding? It still doubles as a shovel tomorrow. The spoon scrapes the bowl one last time. The fire settles into a soft orange hush. You lean back, belly half full, body all ache. And just when the silence feels deep enough to disappear into, someone chuckles. A low voice, a half-finished joke, a shadow moving closer to the fire. Because after dinner comes the stories. Around the fire, no one speaks first. They just shift, stretch, let their armor settle into the dirt. Let their breath match the rhythm of the flame. Then, somewhere near the edge, a voice dry as leather cuts the quiet. You remember Titus, the one who tried to steal eggs from a wild hen near Capua? A few nods. The fire flickers. The air leans in. Turns out she was still sitting on them. The group exhales, soft, amused. Someone adds, he ran like the Gauls were behind him. Another swears she chased him through 3 tents, flapping like she knew Latin. No one cares what bird it really was. The story's lived long enough to earn its own feathers. Another voice picks up. That battle near the marsh where the general gave the signal with his left hand, and the whole second cohort turned around and marched the wrong way. A groan. A hand over a face. Someone coughs to hide the laugh. It wasn't funny then, but now under moonlight, with sore feet and full stomachs, it's safe to laugh at. And maybe that's all anyone really wants tonight. A story that feels like permission. Then, of course, there's the one about the snorer. The man who slept so loud they nearly launched a counterattack at 2 a.m., thinking it was a horn call from the enemy camp. He made 3 men drop their weapons, someone mutters, and one of them wet himself. Silence, then soft low laughter. Not loud, never loud, just enough to feel like you're still alive. These stories don't have morals, They don't have clean endings. Sometimes no one even finishes them. Just trails off with a shake of the head and a chuckle that fades into the smoke. But no one minds, because if it gets a chuckle, it was worth telling. If it doesn't, at least it wasn't silence. After the stories taper off, things get quieter, not empty, just quieter. That's when the little habits show up. One man taps his sword hilt twice before stepping out of the tent. Always twice. No more, no less. No one knows why. Maybe it's a rhythm thing. Maybe it's Morse code for the gods. Either way, he's still breathing, so no one tells him to stop. Another keeps a tiny stone in his left sandal. Says it helps him stay balanced. No one's sure if he means physically or emotionally. But he hasn't tripped since Gaul, so even the centurion leaves it alone. There's a guy who refuses to sleep with his helmet facing the open sky. Says the stars stare back. Someone offered to sew him a curtain. He declined. Another one mumbles to Venus before night watch. Not for love, just to balance out how often Mars forgets his name. Someone else talks to his dagger, in full sentences. The dagger hasn't responded, yet. These things don't slow the march. They don't mess with formation. They're not in the manuals, but they're there, like lucky socks that know Latin. You'd think soldiers wouldn't believe in nonsense, that the harsh world of dust, sweat, and stabbing would beat it out of them. But you'd be wrong, because in a job where your armour breaks, your rations rot, and your orders don't always make sense, a little superstition is the closest thing to control. No one knows if it works, but it doesn't have to work. It just has to keep your brain from quitting before your knees do. The fire's low now, not out, just considerate, like it knows the stories are done and it shouldn't interrupt what comes next. No one moves, no one speaks, not because there's nothing left to say, but because the things still worth saying don't need words. Not tonight. The men sit, shoulder to shoulder, not close, but near enough to share silence, each one holding a thought. Some think of home, if they still have one. Some try to recall a name they haven't spoken in years. A sister, a river, a god. One man looks up. He doesn't say it aloud, but you know what he's asking. When was the last time I looked at the stars and wasn't counting how many hours of sleep I had left? No one says good night. No one jokes. The laughter was there. It had its turn, and now it steps aside. Then, as if on cue, the next watch arrives. Not loudly, just presence, a figure in silhouette, a shifting of sand under boots. The man by the fire stands. His limbs creak. His breath catches for a moment, more memory than muscle, but he rises. One by one, the rest follow. Without a word. Without delay. Even laughter has a watch rotation. The fire dies the way all fires do in the Roman army. Not in a blaze, but in discipline. Boots move through the dust. Swords are sheathed, not slung. The camp resets itself as if the stories were just another formation, and the laughter, another kind of armour. No one claps anyone on the back. No one asks for more. The men return to their tents the way they came out of them. Quietly. Practically. Together. But alone. The sky holds its breath, and somewhere beyond the camp walls, the dark watches back. Tomorrow there will be footsteps again. Orders. Dust. Sweat. But tonight the ghosts have had their say. People think the worst part of being a Roman soldier is the battle. The swords. The screaming. The chance your liver meets a spear before your breakfast digests. But the real bruises? They show up long before the enemy ever does. Welcome to the training field. Dusty, loud, relentless, and always starting just before your legs are ready to forgive you for yesterday. There's no blood here, just sweat and yelling, and the distant sound of a wooden sword smacking someone's pride. You train not because Rome needs warriors. Rome has plenty of those. You train because every legion is a machine, and if one man turns the wrong way, the whole thing grinds into a very embarrassing pile of sandals and shouting. Before you ever touch a real sword, you meet its angry, heavier cousin, the gladius go, made of solid hardwood, balanced like a brick. weighted just enough to remind you that whatever illusions you had about being a graceful fighter, they belong in a scroll, not on the training field. You train with it because if you can swing this, then swinging the real thing will feel like waving a feather. A sharp, deadly, screaming feather, but a feather nonetheless. The logic is Roman and therefore sound. Make it harder now, so you only cry in training. You square off in pairs, one-on-one, eye to eye, splinters to sternum. The instructor barks a command. You raise your shield, you lunge, your partner sidesteps. You hit air, he hits your forearm, crack. Doesn't bleed, he grins. But there goes your afternoon. The pain isn't sharp, it's sincere, like the weapon is trying to introduce itself through your bones. You look down, no cut, no bruise, just the promise of tomorrow's regret. The new recruits flail. The older ones watch, amused. Everyone remembers being the guy who swung too wide and spun in a full circle before falling flat. They don't help you up. That's part of the learning curve. Form matters, posture matters, but mostly what matters is, don't let go of your sword. Drop it once, you run laps. Drop it twice, they give you something heavier. Drop it 3 times and the cook starts asking if you're free to chop onions full time. It's not about elegance. Rome doesn't care if you look good. Rome cares if you stay alive. You don't train to impress the crowd. You train so that when someone runs at you screaming with a blade, your body already knows what to do, even if your brain is somewhere else screaming louder. Eventually, you stop thinking about the weight. Your muscles start handling it. Your wrists ache less. Your stance gets lower. You start hitting the target more than your own foot. And then one day, they hand you a real gladius. It's lighter, smoother, beautiful even. You look at it, and the first thought that comes to mind is, this might actually kill someone. The second thought is, and I'm slightly less likely to die while holding it. Once you learn how to hold your wooden sword without concussing yourself, they teach you the next great Roman principle. Don't slash. Stab it's less theatrical, less poetic, harder to choreograph in plays. But it's how you stay alive. Slashing is wide, it's flashy. It looks good when you're trying to impress your reflection. But a good stab? It's short, straight, efficient. It says, I don't need you to see this coming. I just need it to arrive. There's a saying passed down by men with scars older than your boots. Slashing looks heroic. Stabbing keeps your intestines inside. So you practice, not with enemies but with straw posts. Faces drawn on in charcoal, sometimes smiling, sometimes not. You aim for the chest, sometimes the throat. Never the legs. This isn't a tavern brawl. Slash too wide, you get corrected. Stab too softly, you get mocked. Forget to stab at all. Your name gets yelled so loudly the next cohort learns it by accident. The perfect Roman stab has no flair. It doesn't twirl. It doesn't hum with vengeance. It lands, it exits, it resets. 3 motions: step, thrust, return. Like clockwork, if clockwork could bleed. Eventually your arm stops shaking. Your grip stops slipping. Your wrist learns the difference between intention and impact. You hit the mark more often, and when you don't, you know exactly how far off you were, because your instructor does too. Out loud, it's not about power, it's about precision, and about drilling that precision so deep into your bones that when the real fight comes, your hand moves even if your mind is screaming something else. Training in the Roman army isn't just about learning what to do, it's also about learning what happens when you don't. And Rome believes in consequences. Drop your shield while turning? That's a problem. Because if you can't hold your gear during a drill, you'll drop it faster in a fight. And Rome does not invest in men who leave their protection in the dirt. Fall asleep while standing in formation? Oh yes, it happens. The legs go first, then the back softens. And then, like a majestic sack of flour, you slowly tip forward and hit the ground with all the dignity of a dropped satchel. You get punished. Not because you're human, but because Rome doesn't train humans. It builds units, and then there's the yawning. Not at night, not during watch, no, worse. Yawning while marching. While still in formation. While your cohort is mid-step, and you decide to publicly broadcast your exhaustion like a bored senator. Rome doesn't care if you're tired. Rome only cares if you're in sync. The punishments, they vary, but they all have one thing in common. No sympathy. The lighter ones include carrying stones from one end of the camp to the other. No reason, just because. Running laps in full armour while everyone else watches, the weight builds character, and blisters. Cleaning the horse stalls, a deeply aromatic experience. The harsher ones? Being assigned the next night watch, even if you just finished one. Welcome to sleep deprivation, Roman edition. Head dunking, a wooden bucket, cold water, sometimes ice if they're feeling philosophical. One soldier recalls, I yawned once, just once, didn't even finish it. Before my mouth closed, I was already hugging a bucket like it owed me money. These punishments aren't meant to destroy you, just humble you, remind you that your comfort is optional. Your precision is not. And so, you learn. You blink slower, you breathe quieter, you march sharper. Not because you're afraid of the centurion's voice, but because you remember how cold the bucket was. Not everything is pain. Occasionally, just occasionally, Rome gives out a reward. Not much, but enough to keep your spine straight and your sword arm functional. There's the crown of oak, hand-carved, splinters included, awarded to any soldier who saves the life of a fellow legionary in battle. You don't get gold, you don't get land, you get wood. But in front of the cohort, under the eyes of your centurion, you're called forward. Your name is said clearly, as if it's now worth remembering. You bow your head. They put the wreath on. It feels awkward, but it's the best your scalp has felt in weeks. And then there's the big one, having your name spoken aloud by Caesar himself. If, by some improbable string of luck and limbs, you distinguish yourself in a major battle, you might hear it. This man, Gaius so-and-so, stood firm, brief, formal, unemotional. But it means something. It means your name is now more than a smudge on a payroll scroll. Of course, not all rewards come with ceremony. There's the reward no one talks about, the one you earn quietly. Day by day. It's called not being picked to lead the next charge. You know the guys who get chosen, always eager, always clean, always slightly too loud when volunteers are requested. They shine just enough to be noticed by the wrong officer. You keep your gear tidy. You stab well. You march in rhythm. But not so well they remember you at dawn with a finger and say, send him first, because in the Roman army, the real prize isn't praise. It's prolonged anonymity. A wreath won't stop a blade, but it might make someone hesitate long enough for you to swing first. You don't train to fight better. Not really. Not for elegance. Not for honour. Certainly not for glory. You train so that when the wall of noise and steel finally hits, your body moves just enough for your name to make it into tomorrow's roll call. You train so your shield stays up when someone else's drops. So your stab lands before the fear sets in. So your legs keep marching, even if your head has long since checked out. You don't train to fight better. You train to break later than the man next to you. And in Rome, that's more than enough. Before you fight for Rome, you fight your own stomach. Spoiler, your stomach fights dirty. It doesn't swing a sword. It just gurgles at the wrong time. Like during inspection, or mid-march, or right when the rations run out, and someone mentions boiled boot leather. As a joke, Rome taught you to stab, to shield, to march in terrifying silence. It didn't teach you what to do when dinner is a handful of weeds and water that smells like disappointment. Most soldiers didn't die from enemy blades. They died from the things nobody carved into marble. Bad soup, cold nights, wet boots, and one scratch too many. You train to endure, but nothing prepares you for the moment when your greatest battle is against a questionable route and a spoon with no handle. Hunger in the Roman army wasn't a passing discomfort. It was a daily co-worker, a background singer in every song your stomach made after mile 15. Out on campaign, miles from supply lines, roads behind you burned, roads ahead not even invented yet. You ate what didn't protest too hard. A stream was a blessing. A puddle was seasoning. Some men swore swamp water had body. Others just drank it and hoped for divine filtration. You'd see a patch of weeds, and instead of asking, "Is it edible?" you'd ask, "Has anyone else died from this yet?" Rations ran out. Inventiveness kicked in. Roots, pulled, scraped, chewed, nicknamed sweet greens of the toothless days. Bitter, fibrous, but quiet in the bowl, and not trying to escape, which already made them better than some meat. And meat, if it didn't run too fast or look too poisonous, it had a chance to become dinner. Field mice, birds that blinked too slow. One man grilled a lizard and claimed it tastes like denial. Another found a half-dead fish in a puddle and called it soup. No one disagreed, because hunger doesn't argue. It just chews and hopes. Water? You boiled it. You strained it. You stared at it with the quiet suspicion of a man who's been betrayed before. If it didn't wriggle, you drank it. If it did, if it doesn't wiggle, it's dinner. If it does, extra protein. There was a running joke. Rome conquered the world on barley, vinegar, and blind optimism. And some days, you weren't sure which one had more calories. Daytime in the Roman army meant heat. Dry, heavy, sandal-melting heat. Nighttime, a different beast. A creature born from damp canvas, bad decisions, and the complete absence of insulation. It wasn't just cold, it was training camp of Pluto cold. The kind that crept under your armour, took up residence in your spine, and whispered, "You should have joined the Navy." There were no fireplaces, no coals, just fire pits that died early, and tents that flapped more than they shielded. And no one had a dry cloak. Why? Because that one time it rained 3 days ago, you had nowhere to hang it except on yourself. And now, 3 sunsets later, it's somehow wetter. Your breath fogged, your joints creaked, your skin felt like someone had replaced your bones with chilled iron. Sleep wasn't rest, it was a negotiation with hypothermia. You curled up in a half-frozen ball, hoping your body heat would recycle, and maybe, just maybe, you wouldn't wake up sneezing your soul out. And blankets, those are for senators and fever dreams. Out here, you shared warmth the way you shared complaints, quietly, begrudgingly, and without eye contact. 3 men to a blanket-sized scrap of wool. 1 to shiver, 2 to pretend they didn't mind. By morning, you didn't stretch, you cracked, like a clay pot left out too long. And then, you stood up, shook off the frost from your sandals, and got ready to march again. Because the cold wasn't going to kill you. Not today, anyway. After hunger and cold came the real fun. Illness. Rome had armies, Rome had discipline. What it didn't have was medicine that worked consistently, or at all. There were no real doctors on the front. Just that one guy who knew herbs because he once watched a goat chew bark and stop limping. You got sick, he gave you tea that tasted like regret, and if that didn't help, he bled you. Because if you're going to be miserable, you might as well be lighter too. Malaria wasn't a word then, but everyone knew the rhythm. Chills, sweat, delirium, waking up in your own soaked cloak, wondering if this was how Jupiter felt on a bad day. Sickness in the Roman army wasn't measured in temperature. It was measured in how many times you dropped your helmet before someone noticed. Some survived simply by being too stubborn to die. 3 nights of shaking like a badly oiled ballista. No medicine, no dry clothes, just cursing, shivering, and the occasional prayer to any god who wasn't too busy. Infections. A blister turns into a wound. The wound turns green. And before you can say inflammatio purulenta, your foot smells like next week's funeral. The army didn't issue bandages. They issued vinegar, and the expectation that you'd walk it off. Rome didn't have antibiotics. It had willpower and vinegar. Sometimes both, sometimes neither. Mostly a shrug and someone saying, "Well, if he's still breathing by morning, put him back in the line." And that's how it worked. If hunger didn't break you, and cold didn't crack you, disease would roll the dice next. But if you made it through, you weren't healthy, you were just less dead than expected. If you survived the hunger, the cold, and the smell of Gaius's boots, the enemy was just the final exam. You weren't stronger, you weren't smarter, you were just still there. And in the Roman army, that was a superpower. Survival didn't mean health, it meant being slightly more hydrated than death. It meant standing up when your body politely declined. Most men didn't die from battle. They died from things like drinking the wrong puddle or ignoring the angry red line crawling up their leg. Because in Rome, death didn't arrive with fanfare. It arrived when no one reminded you to wash your hands after digging a latrine. You lived by instinct, by repetition, and by refusing to quit just because your skin was shaking off. And if anyone asked how you made it this far, you'd just shrug and say, "I didn't know when to lie down. You trained for this." And then it starts. The horn blows, your legs move, and your brain tries to leave your body. You trained for the formation, the rhythm, the stance, but now your boot sinks half a foot into wet earth, and all you remember is that your toes are cold and your shield is too heavy. Someone shouts. You're not sure if it's your officer or just Gaius tripping again. Everything you were taught? Gone, replaced by pure instinct and one loud echoing thought. Please don't let me be the first to die weirdly. Your breathing's too fast, your sword feels upside down, and suddenly the guy who fell asleep during shield drills doesn't seem so dumb. At least he's well rested. You, meanwhile, are 80% anxiety and 20% wet wool. And then you see the enemy. They're not mythical, not monstrous. They're just other people, also afraid, also holding something sharp. And now it's just you, your training, and the growing realization that this is going to get loud very, very fast. The noise doesn't hit all at once. It builds, clanks, grunts, shields slamming into bodies. The occasional scream, high, sharp, unmistakably human. It's not a grand soundtrack. There's no heroic brass. Just chaos, like a blacksmith convention where every apprentice brought the wrong hammer. Your ears ring. Not from injury, but from sheer metallic density. Steel hitting steel, iron dragging across shields, blades getting stuck and yanked free with a sound that makes your stomach fold in on itself. And under all of that, breathing. Short, fast, panicked, like 100 men, all realizing at once they should have joined the bakery guild instead. Then there's the smell. It doesn't smell like war. It smells like sweat that's been arguing with leather for 5 hours. Like smoke, like iron, like the inside of a boot left in the sun next to a rotting turnip. You inhale, gag slightly, and keep going. It doesn't smell like glory. It smells like boiled socks and bad decisions. Somewhere, someone vomits. Someone else gets hit in the stomach and lets out a noise that sounds like a goose being mugged. You don't know who's who. You don't have time to ask. There's blood now. You don't know where it came from. Your side, your friend, or the man you just slammed your shield into. It's slick, warm, real. And it starts mixing with the mud beneath you into a new kind of battlefield sauce. Someone falls, someone yells, someone steps on your foot and doesn't apologize, because no one apologizes in war. By this point, you've stopped hearing individual things. The world becomes one solid wall of noise and heat and pressure, as if the gods dropped their hammer on the earth and decided to see what shook loose. And yet, you're still standing, still moving, still clutching your sword like it owes you money. You trained for this, and then it starts. The horn blows, your legs move, and your brain tries to leave your body. You trained for the formation, the rhythm, the stance, but now your boot sinks half a foot into wet earth, and all you remember is that your toes are cold and your shield is too heavy. Someone shouts. You're not sure if it's your officer or just Gaius tripping again. Everything you were taught, gone, replaced by pure instinct and one loud echoing thought. Please don't let me be the first to die weirdly. Your breathing's too fast, your sword feels upside down, and suddenly the guy who fell asleep during shield drills doesn't seem so dumb. At least he's well rested. You, meanwhile, are 80% anxiety and 20% wet wool. And then you see the enemy. They're not mythical, not monstrous. They're just other people, also afraid, also holding something sharp. And now it's just you, your training, and the growing realization that this is going to get loud very, very fast. The noise doesn't hit all at once. It builds, clanks, grunts, shields slamming into bodies. The occasional scream, high, sharp, unmistakably human. It's not a grand soundtrack. There's no heroic brass, just chaos like a blacksmith convention where every apprentice brought the wrong hammer. Your ears ring, not from injury, but from sheer metallic density. Steel hitting steel, iron dragging across shields, blades getting stuck and yanked free with a sound that makes your stomach fold in on itself. And under all of that, breathing. Short, fast, panicked. Like 100 men all realizing at once they should have joined the bakery guild instead. Then there's the smell. It doesn't smell like war. It smells like sweat that's been arguing with leather for 5 hours. Like smoke, like iron. Like the inside of a boot left in the sun next to a rotting turnip. You inhale, gag slightly, and keep going. It doesn't smell like glory. It smells like boiled socks and bad decisions. Somewhere, someone vomits. Someone else gets hit in the stomach and lets out a noise that sounds like a goose being mugged. You don't know who's who. You don't have time to ask. There's blood now. You don't know where it came from. Your side, your friend, or the man you just slammed your shield into. It's slick, warm, real, and it starts mixing with the mud beneath you into a new kind of battlefield sauce. Someone falls, someone yells, someone steps on your foot and doesn't apologize, because no one apologizes in war. By this point, you've stopped hearing individual things. The world becomes one solid wall of noise and heat and pressure, as if the gods dropped their hammer on the earth and decided to see what shook loose. And yet, you're still standing, still moving, still clutching your sword like it owes you money. You don't remember making the decision. You just stab. Not the angle they taught you, not the form they drilled into your bones. Just whatever your arm does while your brain is screaming, now! It lands, somewhere. Someone grunts. You push harder. It's messy, too low, or too high, or directly into something soft that shouldn't feel like that. But it works. Sort of. Because now you're trying to get the blade back and it's not cooperating. Pulling your sword back out feels like trying to unstab a tree trunk. You yank, twist, plant your boot on something disturbingly soft, and finally it comes free with a sound that'll stay with you longer than your childhood nickname. You look down. There's a body. Could be his, could be someone else's, could be a mix. You try not to step on it. You fail. The ground is bodies now. Mud and metal and limbs that aren't where they're supposed to be. And you're skating. Not gracefully, just desperately. Trying to keep your feet while your sandals try to convince you this is a great time to twist an ankle. You don't fall when you die. You wedge, you trip over a corpse. Then another. At this point, you're not fighting for Rome. You're fighting for traction. You duck a swing. You scream something incoherent. You swing back. There's blood on your face. You hope it's not yours. But you don't check. Because the only rule now is keep moving. One foot, then another. One stab, then another. Until your arm shakes, your back cramps, your ears ring so hard they drown out your name. But you keep going. Not because you're brave, because stopping is worse, and somehow, beneath all the chaos, all the blood and yelling and wet leather, you realize you're still here, still breathing, still stabbing, and in this moment, that's the only definition of victory that matters. There's no soundtrack, no drums of war, no angelic choirs building to a heroic crescendo, just breathing. Steel, and a knee somewhere behind you letting out a sound, like an old wagon wheel giving up. The only rhythm is panic. There are men throwing up before even swinging their sword. Others swing 3 times, hit air twice, and then freeze when they realize they don't know who they just stabbed. Was that the enemy? He had a mustache. Everyone has a mustache. There's no room for clarity, just motion, muscle, and a vague hope that the person in front of you looks slightly more confused than you do. You don't feel brave, you don't feel trained, You feel like a bundle of wet wool trying to impersonate a soldier. You're not brave, you're just too confused to run. There's no time to pray, no time to think, only enough space in your mind for one thought at a time. Don't fall. Don't freeze, keep stabbing. Please let that not be my toe. And then for a few seconds, just a few, you realise something terrifying. You've lost track of the enemy. The bodies are too many. The noise too loud. You swing, block, stumble, swear. Someone yells your name. You don't turn. You don't want to see who's missing a leg. And through it all, there's still that one idiot yelling orders like anyone's listening. You hear him somewhere off to the left, shouting, "Form up!" as if form is still a thing that exists in this soup of blood and dust and screaming. You're not in formation. You're not in control. You're just there, moving, reacting, trying to stay vertical in a world that's trying very hard to make you horizontal. There are battles where things go wrong, and then there are battles where nothing ever had a chance to go right. Cannae was the second kind. You're in formation, tight, sweaty, jammed shoulder to shoulder, like a bucket of knives that no one dares to draw first. Then you realise there are enemy lines behind you, and to the side, and to the other side. There's no exit, no clever flanking manoeuvre, no rallying cry, just men pressing forward from every direction. We weren't fighting, we were being filed down. No space to swing, barely space to breathe. You raise your arm, and someone else's shield blocks your elbow. The only tactic is, stab whoever is within stabbing distance, which isn't a plan. It's a slow collective panic. At one point I wasn't sure who I was stabbing, so I stopped checking. You're not outnumbered, you're out-exited. You hear someone screaming, "Hold the line!" But there is no line. Just a circle slowly shrinking, like a noose made of iron and exhaustion. Then there's Alicia. 2 rings of fortifications. You're in the middle, inside the camp. Starving Gauls trying to break out. Outside the walls, more Romans. And you, in between, playing pinball with spears. One man says, "We weren't outnumbered. We were just surrounded with emphasis." You try to hold. Then you try to move. Then you just try not to scream first. Every time you take a step forward, someone behind you screams your name. You turn. Too late. They're gone. Someone asks, "Is this still the same battle?" Another says, "No, this is the next one already." There are no orders. There is no strategy. There's just whoever can still swing without collapsing. You step over a pile of limbs that used to be 3 people and maybe a goat. You stab again. Your sword catches. You let go. You draw your dagger. Someone hands you a new weapon. You don't know whose it was. You don't ask. You just keep going. Because at this point, stopping would require more courage than you've got left. Somewhere, an officer tries to rally. His voice is hoarse. Someone yells back, "What line, sir?" And he doesn't answer. Because there's nothing left to answer with. Not men, not breath. Just noise and motion, and the creeping realization. This isn't battle anymore. This is gravity. You survive. Somehow. And when someone asks how the battle went, you shrug and say, "Not that bad." Because that's easier than explaining how your legs locked up halfway through, or how you nearly stabbed a friend. Because the dust made everyone look like the enemy. You forget the details, or pretend to. You forget how your fingers couldn't hold your sword, how your knees clicked every time you turned, how your breath fogged so fast it made your helmet feel like drowning. But at night, when the camp is quiet and your bones have cooled, you remember one sound. Not a scream, not a clash, just someone collapsing behind you, not dead, just done. You survived, not because you were brave, just because the guy next to you coughed louder. The noise stops, but your ears don't believe it yet. They keep waiting for the next scream, the next clash, the next reason to duck. But nothing comes, only your breath, shallow, uneven, surprised to still exist. You're standing, not because you meant to, just because your legs haven't figured out how to fall. Your sword is still in your hand, not gripped, just there. You're not holding it, it's holding you. You look down. There's mud, blood, a helmet that isn't yours, a body that almost is, and a sandal. You recognize it. Left foot, worn strap, yours, from 2 days ago. You start collecting the dead. Not counting, just gathering. Like firewood, but heavier, more familiar. Some of them you knew, most you didn't. But that doesn't matter now. They're all yours. You find one face you recognize. You don't say his name, you just mutter, "Should have traded boots with you when I had the chance." You unbuckle his armor. His chest is still warm. You flinch, and then keep going. You take his cloak, his knife, his last dry sock. You whisper, "Sorry," and mean it, but your hands don't stop. Next, you move to the enemy. There's no ceremony, just routine. Flip, check, strip, move on. A few groans, still alive. You leave those for the officers to decide. You're not here to pass judgment. You're here to salvage straps and recover anything that won't rot by morning. One of the veterans calls it redistribution of battlefield assets. And nobody laughs, but a few nod. Because somewhere in your pack is now a belt that once belonged to someone who yelled at you in a different language. And you're okay with that. The worst part? You use the same shovel you used yesterday. For digging latrines. You dig with the same shovel you used yesterday. Only now, it's for someone who won't be marching tomorrow. The digging starts before your arms stop shaking. The dirt is dry at first, then clumps. Your shovel, still muddy from the last camp, now scrapes against something harder. Stone, maybe. Or bone. You don't check which. The sky's quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't feel like peace. Just a pause between orders. Your hands ache, not from the weight, from the repetition. One lift, one drop. Again. A foot sticks out as you cover it. A belt snaps as you shift a body into place. You keep going. For some, there's time for proper burial. A shallow trench, a shield to mark the spot. If you remember their name, you whisper it. Most? A layer of dirt, a rock, maybe a sword, jammed into the ground like a broken promise. When there are too many and not enough hands left to dig, you burn. You stack the bodies like kindling, shield fragments, splintered spears, a cloak for the flame. No prayers, no songs, just the crackle of ash and the hiss of what was once lungs. You stare at the smoke rising, not because it means something, but because it's the only thing still moving. Your friend, the one who covered your flank last season, who snored too loud, who once traded your last olive for a better whetstone. He's gone now. He's up there, somewhere between the cinders and the cloudless sky. We didn't say words, we said nothing. That was the most we could afford. No one is allowed to stay behind. You want to. You feel like you should. But the trumpet doesn't wait for grief. Neither does the centurion. You shoulder your pack. Your shield straps dig into the same spot they always do. You look back. Once, not long enough to feel it. Just enough to remember where not to step. The man you buried an hour ago? He'll be marked on a roster. Not with ceremony. Just with ink. And the quiet understanding that his gear has already been reassigned. You hear a voice? Move out. No one argues. No one says goodbye. Because the only way to honour the dead is to keep moving. Preferably without tripping over them. Your boots squelch in the dirt, not because it rained, because too much has soaked into the soil to call it dry anymore. You don't talk. You don't sing. You just march, step by step, past helmets still lying in the grass, past blood that isn't dry yet. We honoured the dead by walking past them efficiently. Someone drops their satchel. Another bends to help. A third keeps walking. There's no wrong choice, just timing. You wonder who'll be next, not out of fear, just logistics. If it's you, someone else will carry your spare sandals. Maybe even use your cooking pot. And if it's not, then you'll do the same. Because the only thing that waits in the Roman army is the next camp, and that's already 2 hills away. You bend down. There's a sword in the mud, good steel, not bent. You check the hilt, still warm. You don't ask whose it was, you just take it. Not out of cruelty, out of math. A few steps away a sandal, left foot. The leather's cracked but wearable. You slide it on. It fits. You take that as a sign. Not a good one. Just a sign that you're still here, and it still works. By now, someone's found a puddle. It's barely water. It smells like disappointment, but it's wet. You splash it on your face, not to clean, to check if you still feel something. You do. Unfortunately, a veteran sits on a rock, staring at the sky like it owes him something. He says nothing, not because he's noble, because he's too tired to waste words on things that won't answer. A younger recruit curls up on his shield, armour on, sword still in hand. He's asleep in seconds. You envy him, because rest right now feels more mythical than Mars. You pass another man, crouching, holding a helmet, not wearing it, just holding it, like he's trying to remember which version of himself used to fit inside. No one celebrates, no one smiles. There are no songs, no tales of valour. You don't celebrate. You just adjust the strap and keep going. Because tomorrow's march won't delay, and your name's still on the list. That night, no one tells stories. No one sharpens weapons. No one brags. They just lie down. Not with relief, but with the kind of stillness that comes after something breaks and isn't quite fixed. There are fewer of you. Fewer boots. Fewer snores. The fire is small. The stars are distant, but no one is screaming, and that is enough. A quiet night after the screaming, that's the only reward you get. Not everyone died. Some people came home. Eventually. Not all at once, not to the same place, and never quite the same shape they left in. Rome gave you a sword, but it never told you what to do with your hands when the sword was gone. There was no horn for the end, no fanfare, just one morning where no one called your name at dawn. No orders, no formations, no march. You sat up, stretched, looked around, and realised you were free, which felt almost as frightening as the battles, because no one tells you what comes next, how to be still, how to walk without armour, how to carry silence when all you've known is the rhythm of marching. You survived the war, but now comes the harder part, learning how to live again. You return, eventually, to a town that didn't expect you, to a family that wasn't sure which version of you might come back, or if you'd come back at all. Rome, generous in theory, gives you land. Not good land, but land that needs someone too stubborn to die. Perfect match. You farm now, sort of. Your back creaks like old leather. Your knees still think they're on campaign. But the field listens. The soil doesn't scream. And that's enough. Some of your comrades open smithies. Hammering iron is easier than hammering formation into children. Others teach boys to swing sticks. Call it sport. But you still catch the bark in their tone. The way they say, again, like it still means something. Stand straight, eyes forward. Hold the line. And the kids just giggle because they've never held anything heavier than a spoon. One guy opens a tavern. He tells stories halfway through, then pours another round before he finishes the part where someone loses an arm. Nobody pushes for the ending. You all already know it. Someone sees you at market and says, "Weren't you with the legions?" You nod. They ask, "Do you miss it?" And you say, "I miss sleeping through the night." Another man, once a centurion, sells cabbages now. Argues with vendors over coins like he used to argue over spear placements. He used to command a flank, now he commands the price of turnips. And somehow that feels like peace. Not everyone talks about what happened. Some can't, some won't. Some just grunt, pour another cup, and change the subject. But their bodies remember everything. You see it in the way they walk. The stiff left knee that didn't used to be stiff. The shoulder that never quite sets down right. The fingers that twitch when thunder rolls in. There's a man in the village who limps, not dramatically, just enough for you to notice. He says it's from farming, but you saw him once, 3 years ago, step between a javelin and a boy too young to know what it meant. He hasn't mentioned it since. Another man has a dent in his forehead. Small, like the world pressed its thumb there once and forgot to let go. He got it at Elysia. You know, because you were there. He doesn't mention it. But every time someone drops a bucket behind him, his hand goes to that spot, like checking if the ground is still real. Some scars are obvious, long, jagged, brag-worthy if you're that kind of man. Others are quiet. A pink line under the chin, a rib that clicks when the weather shifts. The kids ask questions. Did you kill anyone? Did it hurt? "What's that lump on your hand?" And the old man answers, "That lump? That's from Gaul. The limp? That's from tripping over a goat last week." Everyone laughs. No one asks again, because some stories are meant to be told, and some are meant to stay under the shirt, only seen when the sun hits just right and the past says hello through a line of old skin. Some men come back and fold right back into life, like nothing happened. They till the fields. They laugh at market jokes. They forget the exact number of steps in a formation. Maybe because they want to, maybe because they need to, maybe because forgetting is the only luxury Rome couldn't ration. But others don't sleep quite right. They rest in pieces, one hand still curled like it's holding a sword, legs twitching through phantom marches, eyes flickering under closed lids, like they're reading enemy movement in their dreams. There's a farmer near the edge of the village, old now, back bowed, hands like rope. By day he plants beans. By night he sometimes wakes shouting, "Hold the gate!" He hasn't guarded a gate in 20 years. But on windy nights, when the shutters rattle like spears tapping against shields, his voice rises like it's still his job to protect something his grandson doesn't understand. Just stares wide-eyed as the old man gasps and sweats through a war no one else can see. His wife understands. She doesn't speak. She just reaches for the blanket, pulls it up over his shoulders, and waits. He hasn't marched in years, but he still wakes up before dawn. He doesn't go anywhere, just sits on the edge of the bed, watching the dark like it might form ranks again. And when the sun finally rises, he exhales. Quiet, slow, as if another battle has passed. One without horns, but not without cost. Some stories make it to the tavern, told loud over clinking cups and bread gone too hard. Told with laughter, with hands miming the size of a sword or the width of a charge. They're half memory, half myth, and no one minds which is which. The younger ones love those stories, their eyes wide, imagining themselves in armour that always fits, in battles where the good guys always win, in victories with no smell of blood. But not every tale wants to be told. Some stay behind the eyes, in the silence when a name is mentioned, in the way a man pauses, stares past the wall, and says nothing for a beat too long. There's an old man who walks the edge of the village, bent over, slow, his back shaped by more than time. He doesn't talk much, sells eggs, feeds birds, but someone whispers, "He used to hold the gate at Gaul." No one believes it. He looks too small, too tired, too human, but no one asks again, because something about the way he moves, the way he scans the horizon before opening his door, feels like someone who's watched the edge of the world for too long. One evening, a boy sees him change clothes. Just for a second, the shirt lifts, a scar across his ribs, jagged, pale. The boy says nothing, just stares. Because suddenly, the stories aren't fun anymore. They're real. And real doesn't always come with punchlines. Some truths aren't spoken. They're worn, carried, not shared, but recognised. And once you recognise them, you never ask again. Rome was great, but only because someone else carried the weight. Empires don't build themselves. They aren't held up by maps, monuments, or marble busts. They're held up by backs that never made it into history books, by blistered heels and shovels that didn't survive the campaign. Rome marched, but only because someone else bled quietly behind the banner. Not everyone died. Some came home, and some were simply never remembered at all. Ask anyone to name a Roman general. There's a list, a Caesar, a Scipio, maybe even a Marius if they've read enough. But no one names the man who held the East Gate at Gaul for 2 winters straight, who didn't sleep through storms, who didn't abandon his post. He didn't write anything. He couldn't afford a tombstone. But for 2 years, he was the hinge that Rome swung on. He's not in your textbook, but the enemy never got past him. There's a saying, Rome built roads, but roads don't lay themselves. Somewhere under every stone slab is a scar that got reopened trying to carry it. A bent nail, a fragment of a boot, a coin dropped by a man who never got paid. The empire expanded not with speeches, but with dust in the lungs of men who didn't know Latin well enough to argue. And when it was done, no one came back to thank them. Just the next order, the next march, the next fort. You won't find their names in marble, but you'll find their footprints under every road Rome built. Rome talked about duty. The Senate spoke of honour. Scrolls called it virtue. But the man holding the line in the rain didn't call it anything. He just hoped someone would bring him dry socks before nightfall. Was it noble? Maybe. Was it beautiful? Rarely. Was it necessary? Always. You call it sacrifice. He called it Tuesday. When you're the one carrying the shield, phrases like glory and virtue tend to sound more like decorations for people who weren't there. That doesn't mean they're not real. Just that they hurt more up close. Some returned, bent, quieter, with eyes that scanned a little too far into the distance. They didn't tell stories about their own deeds. They told stories about others. A man who threw himself in front of a javelin. Another who held the pass. The one who didn't make it out of the river. He doesn't wear medals, he wears silence. They remembered names you'll never hear. They lit fires for men you'll never know. And when they talked, it wasn't to impress. It was to remember. To keep a little piece of someone else alive. Even if only in half a joke. Or a nod across a room. Or a certain way of stirring the stew. The truth is, most legacies don't get written. They get lived once, and then folded into the soil. Rome didn't build itself on heroes. It built itself on continuity. Men who showed up, held the shield, passed it on. There are no statues for that. Just fields still standing. And towns that never fell. You want a lesson? Don't look at the victories. Look at the men who carried water uphill while someone else gave the speech. They're not gone. They're just not listed. You won't remember his name. But you walk safer because he stood the post. You eat well because he built the road. You sleep deeply because he kept watch. History forgets, but sometimes the soil remembers. The lesson isn't in the banner. It's in the man holding the pole so it wouldn't fall over during a storm. It's not in the speech. It's in the cough of the soldier standing guard while it's being read. It's not in the statue. It's in the hands that mix the clay. You've reached the end now. Not of the war, not of Rome, just the end of one man's march. From recruit to veteran to someone quietly watching the gate of a farm that no longer needs guarding. And maybe that's enough. Because it lasted. Because he did. If you're still here, blinking into the quiet, feeling the weight of linen or blankets or just the end of a long, long day, then listen closely. There's no more shouting, no more marching, no horns, only the soft hush of history settling into silence. And maybe, just maybe, you'll hear footsteps. Not loud, not threatening, just steady, even, measured like a man trained to guard what matters. If you lie down tonight and hear footsteps in your dream, don't be afraid. It's only a Roman soldier on the third watch. He's used to the dark by now. Let him walk. He's good at it. You can rest, because tonight someone else is on guard. Good night, and sleep well. From those who stood the line before you did.